Welcome to Sky Notes. In this episode, Tracy and Lillian are talking about Mars, how it shows up in a birth chart, what happens when it moves by transit, and where it's often misunderstood. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's check our Sky Notes. Hello, Lillian. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sky Notes. Today, we are talking about Mars in astrology. And we're doing that in honor of Mars going into its own sign yesterday. Mars is now in Aries. And thank goodness, I say that tentatively, but because in Pisces, it wanders and all these planets are in Aries being ruled by a Mars that wanders.
Right.
So to have the shift into Mars kind of doing its own thing, helpful? I don't know. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, I can't leave out that it's running smack into Neptune. And so it's kind of going from little goofy, dizzy space to bigger, goofy, dizzy space. But I do feel the rush of presence and that spring feeling, and my body's really excited to be here. And I feel like a lot of that is getting into alignment with that Aries energy.
Well, and to be fair, you and I combined share quite a bit of Aries energy.
Yes.
It's my moon, so you know there's an energizing definitely, and a desire. And I don't know how other people feel about this, but I definitely want more caffeine.
Right.
When Mars is right, just because where it is in my chart, when Mars is in an energized sign, I want to match that energy, and caffeine is a Mars remedy.
Right.
It's very Aries, caffeine, for sure. But it's also, and the reason why I hesitate is there's less patience. People can be a little bit more run by their emotions or like instincts, right? Less about emotion and more about our instincts. So less thought before action is the potential.
Yeah. When I see Mars drifting around a planet, whether natally or by transit, I do think there can be an inclination to be impatient, or impatience that leads to anger, or slightly disruptive vibe, even if it's that sexy fighting vibe, So I do think about that, but it's such a relief to have it out of Pisces. Absolutely.
Yeah. Everything feels like it's got a bit more of a direction today than it did yesterday morning. And so I feel like people are going to be able to get things done maybe a little bit quicker. Also be able to let go of stuff that they needed, right? The beauty about strong, fiery Mars energy is that there's not that need to hold on, right? It's like, okay, let's move on. So if there's things that people have been holding on to for a while, Mars and Aries might be the push to help them let stuff go. So yeah, I think that could be pretty helpful too.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about it in a few different ways. We want to talk about it in a birth chart and some of the conditions that it will be in or could be in and what that means. And then a little bit by transit. And you're going to talk to the skipped step idea of Mars.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk a little bit about how to use Mars and how to work with it. Hey?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. So I find that Mars, if it's making a connection in the chart, will almost always add impatience to the relationship between those two planets. And I find that that's the one exception where sign doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's going to make a difference, but it's not going to change that affect. Would you agree with that?
I would actually, but I have seen some, maybe it's because I lived in the Pacific Northwest. Tell me if I'm wrong. Let's say this. My husband has Mars conjunct his sun, as does his brother. Since I've been hanging out with him, there are more that like poop, 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 poop. They're popping up everywhere. And I've noticed that they have a very strict physical regimen, and you really don't want to interrupt that. And they may put conditions on it, like I want to succeed in this way or that way. But that those are the ways they let go of all of that energy.
Yeah. Well, and it's great that they figured that out about themselves, and I find that whenever you have Mars in a birth chart, because, it runs our adrenaline, our muscles, our blood pumping, right? That if it is in a birth chart, if it's close to the sun, if it's close to the ascendant, if it's close to the moon, any one of those things, or even if it's close to Mercury and you want to clear your mind, doing something Martian, so
Oh,
physical
I love
activity,
that.
something that gets the adrenaline up,
Yeah.
can be really helpful to sort of calm Mars down, I guess, and not create those impatient, reactive Mars things. So
Right.
making Mars happy can be a thing that shuts it up so the other planet can do it, the thing it wants to, right? Or needs
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas with say the outer planets, I see it more as a working with Mars to get what you want out of that other planet.
Mm.
I mean, it's kind of the same, but it's less about our personality with the outer planets and less about our well-being in such a way. Does that make sense?
It's like less, like if Uranus told me not to take things personal, it would be the first time in my life that I believed that that could be true. Right. And I'm saying that as an emotional person who recognizes that a lot of things are personal. However, most of the time when people go, that's not personal, they mean very quiet, be very the outer planets, since they're transpersonal, right, are carrying the vibe of millions of people, um, and our ancestors and the future folks, indulge me. And so therefore, um, like I think about our lives, right? Like right now, what are we cruising around the late 70s or something in life expectancy? And, we've all traveled robustly or we haven't. 90% of people in the United States don't have a passport, for example, which is such a surprise to me. But I get it. Massive country. Even if they don't have a passport, they might have traveled 20,000 miles, Lots of experiences. And I tend to think about for the times when we didn't have long lifespans, are we living like 20 of them, 5 of them, 4 of them? Like, you know what I mean? Because the intensity and the difference and the way lives change so intense. But what you were saying, yeah, I feel like the outer planets are saying everybody's going that way. You gonna join them?
Mm, right. Well, and you and I were talking about that idea of the social responsibility of Mars and
Yeah,
how, like I had said, Aaron Sullivan has two very strong distinctions where
right,
it's like an instinctive survival, me, Mars. And
right.
then this other piece, which is more um, collective and more from a place of morals and integrity and, helping other people.
Right, right, right.
Right.
There's yeah, the ladder of the planets. I dove into some Rob Hand, and he talks about a transpersonal layer of planets, a collective layer of planets, and a personal layer of planets. And to keep it just kind of cut and dry, the personal planets are the sun, the moon, Mercury, and Venus. And as a person who does astrology, every planet on my chart is mine. Thank you very much. So to have to keep giving them back because they're not just mine is really confusing, but they aren't all mine. And part of that is the collective planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. I never would have thought Mars, which I think of as like the motor, the engine, the vitality under the sun that gets the sun going, the paramour of Venus, who Venus goes, I would like to go to a helicopter restaurant, and he calls up to get a reservation. So that sense of going to do something for someone is there. But until I saw this ladder of planets, I hadn't thought, like, of course, Mars is a social planet. And then the concept of, I don't want to go into it, but the like arete or the good warrior, or like I loved that first Gladiator movie. And my husband is a classics major, so he would go talk about how the best warriors were the ones that wanted to become farmers, and that's kind of what they aspired to because it carried the answer, like, in the title. And I can see it from that place. And I think from that place, I can understand it, especially as somebody who's got Mars tangled up in a bunch of really loud stuff, you know.
Mhm. Well,
So
and
the
see,
transcendental, sorry, there's one more layer
that's
to the wrong hand stuff is the transcendental. And that's the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And, you know, as we talk through the conditions, we're going to kind of set the table. All of these are cumulative unless we're talking about a different technique. And so this is one of the details that we want to keep in mind is that I'll give you the quote that Rob said. Mars is almost invariably treated as if it is a personal planet. That is when it becomes a malefic. And I just thought that was so clear, you know.
yeah. Well, it's just another translation of that, what, what Aaron said, and more eloquent. I love it. It's beautiful. And what's really fascinating when you think of it within that structure is that if you think about it just where it is, so we have
Mhm.
everything, the Earth and then Mars. So Mars
Yeah.
is sitting between us and those social and then outer planets.
Mhm.
And so if it's facing inward, it's not doing its job, because its
Right.
job is to take everything leading up to it and then
Right.
take it out,
Right.
right? If it's pointing towards us, which is kind of what Rob's saying,
Mhm.
we're not using it to its capacity or to its best
It
benefit,
all
even to
makes sense.
ourselves, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And it was interesting because Carolyn Casey in Making the Gods Work for Us
Mm.
talks about how for millennia, all of these cultures before Christ or BC or whatever we're calling that now, BCE, um, were Mars worshiping, right? And it was this much more spiritual idea of Mars. And she describes finding the Amazonian warriors
Mm.
and how they're scarred, but they almost all died of old age.
Right.
Like very rarely did they die for their wounds, because
Right.
it was only ever to protect the collective
Right.
that they went to war, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
all of those are the examples of the same thing, which is quite a beautiful way of looking at Mars for sure.
It
And
really is. Yeah.
even if you're thinking about the symbol with the circle and the arrow, you want the arrow pointing outwards, not inwards, which,
Exactly.
yeah, makes perfect sense. Love it.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
Very
like with everything, we want to understand the condition of the planet. You know, we know that Mars is the motor. I grabbed a little speaky part to this. One moment. So Mars, its nature and constitution is hot, dry, fiery, masculine, nocturnal, lesser in fortune, choleric. The parts of the body are many. I'm not going to go through them all. One of them is the left ear. The conditions in peoples are everything pertaining to war or quarrelsome persons, abusive persons, seditious persons, drunks, robbers. I feel like I'm on a blazing saddles. Um, the endowments and magistries are leaders of armies, workers with fire and iron. The colors are ruby red. The flavors, which I thought was really interesting because I'm really into all the flavors, bitter, tastes of gall or sharp tastes. And then Padua is one of the regions of Mars. I'll have to
ah,
look up Durham, but I'm going to guess it's Taurus, you know.
that that bitter association. If you take herbs for inflammation, and I'm only this is only from having them prescribed, not that I know anything about them. I don't.
Mm.
But I know Will had given me something for inflammation, and it was the bitterest, most awful. And I asked something about like a way to bypass the flavor, and he's like, part of the remedy. Like actually experiencing it and tasting it is part
Yeah,
of the remedy, that
interesting.
bitterness. And it's like, I can't even iterate how intense the bitterness was, but
Yeah,
it's and inflammation is a Mars problem. It's a Mars,
right,
an overactive Mars issue for sure.
right,
Physically, Mars will create inflammation. And so yeah, that heat so you assume spice.
right,
You assume, like as soon as you go to the flavor, you think, but no, it's that bitter, yeah,
right. That I like that. So,
pungentness.
if you're thinking about expansive, right? Bitter is not expansive.
Mhm.
Sour, what's that? Sour lemon,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah. Hmm. Well, and thinking about Mars before we get to conditions and
Mhm.
to what we were talking about with that ladder,
Yeah,
when you start to think about in the manifestation order of the planets,
right.
right? Mars can't go and do what everybody else needs it to do. First of all, if it's not pointing outward, but also if Jupiter thinks that your intentions are not moral within its own description in your chart,
So smart.
it won't bring in what Mars is asking.
Right.
Right. So that makes, when I think of it in that context, it makes absolute sense to me
Mhm.
that there needs to be some kind of morality and benefit to others
Yeah.
in what Mars is doing. So this I love this conversation because this is something that's been like little things in my brain, but till today, not a whole picture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm with you there. And even last week's discussion on Uranus, I went back and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta think about this a little bit more. It's so exciting. And it is these nuggets of, wow, yeah, I see that. It's different. And you can really see we're sort of lost with regard to, what is the common good. And I have two things that I wanted to say about that. One is I'm like a third or fourth generation person who worked for the federal government in the United States. And there was a clear understanding that you wouldn't make as much money because if you offered a lot of money, it would attract scoundrels. And so you were making a sacrifice
Right.
to be taken care of. You'd have a good pension and you'd be well taken care of with regard to healthcare. And that's one thing. The other one is, I think it's, I don't want to, I mean, I'll say this, anthro, anthro something. Anyway, the study of ancient peoples, right? But I don't want to say that. I want to say somebody went and studied an indigenous group, multiple indigenous groups, to ascertain what the differences were in what they called high context societies, low context societies. And so high context societies are people who explain everything. I'm a classic high context person. This is gold. It's very like you're going to get everything explained or offered up. Low context is people who have been around each other a long time. Think like rural Japanese families, many generations. There's an expectation of similarity that becomes almost impossible to achieve, right? And I feel like because of the internet, we've just tossed all of that up in the air. And now we're all in need of a lot of context and not at all trained in how to provide it. Um, Even if you are so inclined, you may not share relevant stuff. So I find it interesting that the Mars is saying, hey, don't forget your community. And your community is everybody. So ta-da, ta-da. So the other things, snippets that I got that will come to play later, we were talking about like compatible planets, planets that are easier and planets that are harder. I bring that up to sadly share one of the more difficult planets that Mars works with is Saturn. Unlike, Uranus and Saturn kind of jostling for, who's going to make or break the rules, Mars and Saturn really fight a lot, a lot. And so the recommendation is to work through issues, where that energy pops up that we were talking about. If there's a conjunction with the sun, if you've got a Saturn Mars conjunction, you're probably working really hard on something inside.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's interesting because I'm both Mars and no, both Saturn and Jupiter
Mhm.
are going to have a problem with Mars if it doesn't have a goal. It doesn't
Right,
have a goal that helps others, right?
right,
So Saturn's going to be okay with Mars if you're building some form of structure
right.
that will contain
Yep,
people in a
yep,
way, right? And Jupiter is as long as you are coming from a place of truth
right.
and high morals and all, then okay, then let's go take action and do what we have to do. So it's interesting because it's like I think that Mars can actually be at odds with any planet. Like I think it can be a problem for any
It's
planet.
that energy, right? Like some people perceive positive stress as just disruptive, right? Like going to
Right.
go to a high school reunion and then you're like, that's not supposed to be stressful,
Right. Right.
So
Right.
figuring out, your stress tolerance.
Well,
Yeah.
then it's also, I mean, I think one of the biggest Mars lessons you can learn is the difference between being stimulated and being energized.
Ooh, I like
They're
that.
not the same. And I
Right.
think like that's something I definitely had to learn because I loved being overstimulated as a kid, as a
Yeah.
young adult, right?
Yeah.
And then realize that, oh, like that was not about having energy. That wasn't about anything
Right.
positive because I would sustain that with a lot of caffeine, right?
Right. Right.
Falsely, falsely, I would say.
Sustainable systems definitely come
Yes.
to fore later on in life. Yeah, I have that Mars Saturn in opposition. And so my experience is similar from what I understand to other folks who have it that in that particular configuration because I got a lot of stopping and starting. And then there's also the component of violence when it's not necessarily you. I mean, I have a temper. Please, of course I have a
Yeah.
temper. But I don't ever want to harm anyone. It is the foundation of how I live. You know what I mean? It's no part of how I want to be. And I have found that that means that it shows up like over there, still in my vision, and with many things that show up that aren't necessarily on your path or your chosen path, if you react to it, you may attract it over to you, kind of thing. And
Right.
so, yeah, that's another component is to understand that because it's a really energizing and restructuring dynamic, that dynamic is not who I am. And it's something that I may witness.
Right. Yeah. And there's what you're saying makes me think about that piece with Mars being reactive versus taking action, right? And
Mm,
and um, I had a thought while you were talking, something about because in traditional astrology you have the diurnal versus the
that's
nocturnal
right.
versus the diurnal planets, and it's
Yep,
just whether they're affiliated with the sun or the moon.
that's right.
And so Mars is a nocturnal planet; it's
That's right.
associated with the moon.
That's right.
And to me, it that reactivity can be worked on if the moon is worked on. Like
Yeah.
to me, there's like a direct connection between the
I think
two.
that's why I was thinking it was like an emotional thing instead
Yeah,
of working on. I mean, the beauty of emotional stuff, pardon me, that's my chair, is that you can work on anything and it can be a way to process your emotions. I definitely have heard this trick, and I'm not a therapist, and I recommend everybody go get all of the support they need. But I do enjoy if you feel a sense of discomfort coming up and you engage in a process, why not say before you go into the process, hey, emotional stuff, come here, check this out, and then go do the process to kind of cement it together. That's what you're
right,
doing, right?
right, right, right,
Surface the intention a little bit more.
right, right. And it almost seems to me like if we're talking about when we talk about somebody who's in their trauma, I hate to use that phrase, but people know what I mean when I say it. Um, then the outcome is the reactivity of the Mars, right?
Yeah,
So, and it makes perfect sense that then that loop between the moon and Mars, there's an instinctive thing that happens,
yeah.
whether it's through violence or frustration or anger, or however that plays out, right?
I appreciate that you say that because, there is a lot of, I think about this a lot with, as I say, folks who weren't raised right, which I consider myself one. I was sort of raised by my sister and my mom, and they did the best they could. But my goodness, there's a lot that I didn't know, and there's a massive difference in aligning your energies that comes from context being understood. And I think trauma creates misfirings all over and can mimic anything, can mimic autism, ADHD, any variety of illnesses. Or it can, I don't know if it can kick them off because I'm not a brain scientist. Um, but because of those misfirings, I feel like I'm trying to get to, it's really worth it to figure out where that compassion lies while still not putting up with people's crap. And certainly as a really emotional person, I have presented things in a way that elevates their importance when it's not that big of a deal. And so I've had to like, whoa, like rein myself in. And so finding your place with that is great if you're continuing to try to figure out how to work with folks. Not that you need to work with everybody, but that's, my 14 cents, 12 cents, 6 cents.
So in a natal chart, I don't think we've said this, like gotten right straight into the point
Right.
about how, Mars is our drive. It's
Right.
how we go out and we get how we take action, period. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's in every area. So it's also the planet of sex.
Right.
And that's the place where we end up tiptoeing. Like, even when I was writing the book and I was writing about Mars, there's a part of me that really wanted to go down a different rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But of course, that's a whole other book. And
I love that though. Yeah.
because I feel like there's a whole story there about how if there is some kind of dysfunction or there's some kind of an emotional thing, then
Right.
one of the things that can present with a Mars being in dysfunction can be around our sexuality and
Right.
how we approach sex.
Right.
And so I think that that's something to consider. And you and I were talking before about how Neptune is talking with Mars right now. Mars has to talk to Neptune first before it can do the rest of its sign.
Right.
And it's interesting to see whether it's by transit or in a natal chart, that combination of Mars and Neptune can be a spiritual warrior, right? It can be that kind of energy, or it can be like a total deadening of sexual energy.
Right. Right.
And so it's interesting to see, like, by transit, what this is going to produce with the two of them having that conversation. And I know that I had a toilet thought yesterday. It's amazing how our brain, the synapses that happen when you're doing your regular daily things. But I was thinking about how if you're having a transit between Mars and Neptune, if the transit is from Mars to your Neptune, you're more likely to have some form of take up a spiritual fight.
Yeah.
If Neptune is going to aspect your Mars, you're more likely to ditch sex for spirituality.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I feel like that's something that should be researched. You think that would be?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I got a couple of books on Tantra years and years ago, and it was so much fun because I didn't get like the textbooks, the ancient textbooks, but they said, sex is not the whole part. It's how you wash your dishes. It's how you do everything. So, it circles back around. Yeah.
Well, and even like thinking about it in terms of Mars and manifesting led me to think about sexual magic and how that apparently I've never worked with it. I don't know anything about it, but in the magical, community and speaking to people who work quite heavily in the magical realms of things, that's one of the most powerful and potent forms of magic, which I find really fascinating.
I believe it. I think, when Bad Bunny did the wedding at the Super Bowl, there's a guy I read, Terry Pratchett, and he talks a lot about he leverages common myths in England and common witchy practices in England that he can track down and puts them into narratives. And that's not all he does, but it is one of the things that he does. And a wedding during an event is the binding of a ritual. And I love that Mars vibe, right? Like that is because it's the union, right? It's not bounding that is insufficient on either end. It's,
Right.
pretty
Right.
exciting stuff. So,
Well, and to your point, thinking about the practice of binding,
yeah.
right? And I remember when we were getting married and we had rain, we were having an outdoor ceremony and we had rain. And I had a wedding coordinator person and she called, she's like, yeah, it's raining, but that's good luck because in old times it was harder to break the bind of the
I
claw
believe it.
if it was
Yeah.
wet, right?
Yeah.
But that makes me think of the difference between Mars in Aries and Mars in Scorpio.
Exactly.
Because on Mars and Scorpio, that wet, cold sign is going to have longevity and it's
Yes.
going to stick and it's going to hold on. Some of the notes that I made about Mars natally. So in my tongue stopped working. So Mars natally, instinctive drive and survival response, right? So that speaks to what we said about if you're living in survival, then Mars can be problematic.
Right.
It helps us go after what we want or to don't go after what we want, right? If there's issues around Mars.
Right.
And it also shows relationship, conflict, anger, assertion. And assertion, it's interesting because it gets lumped into the more aggressive side of things, but that assertion is important to assert. Mars asserts our will and allows us to be ourselves, which is very important in a relationship.
And yeah, and you can see where that would potentially conflict with Saturn, that's going to be creating the structure that can sustain.
Yeah.
So if Mars is creating the structure, or I'm sorry, if Saturn's creating the structure and Mars is asserting all over, like I used to say I was not really into hierarchy until I met a firefighter. And then I thought of them being on the ladder and they hear hose coming through and they go, hold on a minute, let's talk about this. Like then hierarchy made all the sense in the world. You want the people to do the things in a system, right? And so you want the assertion to move along with it. So it can't be initially deprived of its own autonomy or Venus connection to what it wants. But what it's saying over and over is there's going to be an excess. You're going to make more than you need. You got to share it.
Yeah.
It'll
But
sour.
it comes down to humans wanting to make everything good and bad and like on a scale of lowest to highest.
I like that. Yeah.
Right? It's like hierarchy isn't about who's most important. It's that what's the order of operations? And so who in that moment is important and should we be paying attention to? Right? Because they have
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
specific job within the order of operations, and that
Yeah.
needs to be prioritized this moment. And then we move on to somebody else who has a different thing, right? Especially I'm
A
using your
million percent.
firefighter analogy, right? And it's like, so it's not about who's the most important versus who's the least. It's who's the most important in the moment because their job is the thing that we're doing,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah. But as humans, we always need to, that ego can get in our way and create
It's
trouble.
so funny because is it the ego or is it the brain? Do you know what I mean? They're both so sticky. And the brain, this is what I think is the difference. The ego gets stuck to stuff because you're relying on it to tell you who you are. You need the people you said you needed because they tell you who you are. When you're with these people, you feel like yourself, the behaviors, etc. The brain has an idea to finish quickly and do more.
Well, and it needs to organize itself in whatever way it wants to, right? And so that's where the hierarchies come in. Where does the information need to be put?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, a brain without this meat suit that cannot connect to this is going to run you off a cliff every time.
Let's talk about some of the things that can affect how natal Mars plays out. So, it's our drive, it's how we go after things, it's our sexuality or our sex drive. That's a better way to put it.
Right.
It rules our sexual organs on top of the blood and what was it, the left ear? That was a random association.
I'm so excited to go look that up. Rex Bills. I'm going to go look that up.
Very cool. So, it's going to be definitely affected by the sign that it's in, right? Immutable Mars is going to be less direct.
Right.
An air Mars is going to need to think it through first.
Right.
Water Mars is going to go by how it feels,
Right.
right?
Maybe a
Fire
very
Mars,
sensual. Yeah.
Fire Mars might be the one that needs to put its ego in check before it makes choices. And Earth is going to be pragmatic in, whatever that Earth sign decides is pragmatic, because that's
That's
different from
right.
Earth sign to Earth
And
sign.
if for one of the conditions, it matters what the gender of the planets were. And we kind of throw up our hands a little bit and say Mars is a masculine sign, sometimes thought of as feminine. So as a
Okay, yeah.
masculine sign, we've already talked about, are you born in the daytime, diurnal, or nighttime, nocturnal? If you're born in the nighttime and Mars is above the horizon, those are two conditions that are helpful for Mars.
Right.
And uh, there's one more element, and we'll get to it. But those details matter because they become diagnostic.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
and it sometimes some of these classifications can get people in trouble in trying to understand the astrology,
yeah.
because when we talk about rulership, detriment, fall, all of those classifications, people, again, as humans, good or bad, we tend to classify, right? And
Mhm.
so you think Mars is in detriment in Taurus, right?
Right.
The opposite of it in rulership in
Right.
Scorpio. And so you think, "Oh, Mars bad. That Mars can't be Marsy." But
Mm.
yet, if you were to go and look at professional athletes, and especially if they need lots of muscle,
Mm.
that Mars is in Taurus
Yeah.
often, like
Yeah.
so often. And I think it comes down to, first of all, the physicality of Taurus,
Mhm.
but the tenacity,
Right.
right? And
Right.
also to me, a planet in detriment has something to prove.
It's
Or
interesting to
it
me.
can.
I haven't quite figured out the dynamics. And since the oppositions I have are super engaging, it's hard to hear that right from a sun standpoint. And then looking across to the other sun or whatever planet and their detriment. It's a miracle we all get along at all. At all.
But okay, let me put it to you this way. So Mars needs to Mars,
Yeah.
right? And so it can Mars best
Yeah.
in Aries or
Mhm.
Scorpio. Two
Mhm.
totally different functions. Like, it's going to operate very differently, but it gets to be Mars
Yeah.
very easily in those signs.
Yes.
In the opposite sign, it's just as active,
Right.
right? On the axis.
Right.
But because it's not in the sign it's supposed to be in, there's something it feels like it needs to do to prove its value.
Right. 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 And supposed to be.
So some of the conditions are in rulership, all of these, we know about rulership, we know about exaltation, we know all of these things. And that's going to affect how Mars performs for sure and how active it is. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, and then it's going to be the relationships to planets, as you mentioned, the opposition in your chart. So it's going to have conversations, which affects how it's going to operate. Mars, Saturn, always, no matter what the aspect is one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake.
Right.
And it's learning how to navigate them, right?
And it's starting to come back. There was some sense like of abilities because yes, you can say it's a miracle that we get along at all, right? But then there's this understanding that's really quite deep of how we managed to do it thus far, and this sense that I'm going to put it this way, indulge me. It's the illusion of discord is hiding how ultimately cooperative we can be and the imagination that can erupt when you have Mars in Scorpio in the 10th at night could be really profound and deep. And you could have so much comfort. Let's put it in the 8th. Let's put it in its own house. You could be able to help in ways that people will never see. Do you know what I mean?
In the eighth, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yes. I would actually
It's
argue
really,
that would be its job in the
well,
eighth.
yeah, but like it would also get like I used to have this dream that I was face down on the top of a diesel truck and the motor was going, and it took forever to go, get in the truck, get in, that's you. And so there's like, they got to identify with that and own that, right? And then understand the consequences and, be a little
Right.
Jedi Knight, even though it's a risky biscuit.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing too that we didn't mention earlier on, so Mars rules knives.
Yeah.
So one of the other we talk always warrior is the thing that we talk about, but there's the surgeon. Like
Yes.
to me, Mars and Scorpio is the surgeon. It wants to cut
Nice.
things open and see how they work. It wants to dig
Yeah.
right to the bottom and
Yeah.
figure out right through cutting, seeing what's working and what's not working.
Yes.
And that is, that's one of the Mars remediations is
Right.
cutting, whether it's through surgery or whatever, or needles, tattooing. That's all very Martian.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, so that's kind of, I think, why I jumped to in the 8th, that would be Mars's job, right?
Yeah.
Is to, because that's one of the, like, whenever I look at the 8th, there's something about helping people for sure in there. And Scorpio at this very deep level, Mars, it's going to cut you open.
Right.
That's how Tracy's brain works. If
There's another, because there's on the other side of that, the flip side, where you're in Taurus, I would trust a Mars in Taurus to be a good doctor. Maybe that athlete becomes a personal trainer, right? And then they have that same, like I've kind of been digging the polarities, kind of picking up some of the depth. Scorpio has this way of understanding survival that my sense is Scorpio is always going, oh yeah, I'm going to die. So what? And then Taurus is always going, no, I'm not going to die because of this thing. You know what I mean? So they're grappling with the same values, level of life, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a survival piece in there.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but they're just going to approach it totally differently, yet have the same concern and the same need.
Right. So I could see the doctor, but the doctor in a Mars and Taurus would be an herb doctor or somebody who's doing a lot of non-invasive things.
Right. Growing herbs and plants and things to help heal. Yeah. I love that. And so here's the thing. So if Mars is it's not in any of those places, it doesn't have any dignity, it doesn't have any help from other planets. And we have a condition called peregrine. And we don't talk about that very often. And it's interesting because I have found that when I've asked people about peregrine planets, I only ever got one great description, and that was from Sam Reynolds. And he said peregrine planets need to be stimulated. They need help, right? And it makes sense because they're not getting help from anybody, right? If they're not in another planet's place to help them, they're on their own. Right.
And this is where the sense of community really comes into play, right? Because they're the wanderer, they're the stranger. I was talking recently about how I was talking to the child of a pastor, and I was saying in the South, the easiest way to feel like welcomed is to sit next to the wife of a pastor, because it's often her job to welcome the stranger.
Right.
So there's a place built in. But I mean, the stories are all over about people wandering where they shouldn't be and being a stranger, and that's enough to get them whacked or crazy stuff to happen. So it stands to reason that a peregrine planet would be in a bind. Who can they work with? They need to be invited, right? That makes sense.
Yes. And so imagine, like, if we make Mars a person, and he's a young warrior going to battle, and he's got nobody telling him what to do, where to go, or even why he's there. He's just going to shoot randomly at things. Like there's absolutely nothing giving it direction.
Right.
So peregrine planets are interesting. And for Mars, it's going to be what am I supposed to be doing? And so there's going to be part of that lifetime is going to be figuring out how to take action, which actions to take.
Right.
There's likely going to be a very selfish phase, learning the difference between when I'm doing it for me versus doing it for other people. Right. And so that's an interesting condition. And so likely Mars becoming useful and doing something that is helpful to the person who has that Mars likely is going to take some time, and it's going to be more obvious and more smooth sailing later in life, I would think.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right. We're trying to figure out how to get the motivation through the engine cleanly. And so
Mhm.
peregrine is sort of like, you really hope you don't run out of gas.
Right. That's true. That's true for
Yeah.
sure. Yes. And you and I were speaking earlier in the week about it.
Mhm.
And I have this.
Yes.
And but now the gift of it is that by progression, it went into a good,
Right.
helpful Mars sign.
Mhm.
And you can mark that in my life because all
Yeah.
of a sudden it's like that peregrine thing doesn't go away in the natal chart,
Right.
but the choices I took and steps I took once it changed signs by progression had tangible outcomes.
Right.
So it became a lot easier to choose the path and the direction to take action in because I was starting
Right.
to see, oh, okay, that's what happens when I do that.
Right.
As opposed to just feeling like you're kind of throwing things up in the air and not knowing what the outcome was, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then another thing that it can be is out of bounds. So
Right.
everything but the sun can be out of bounds because it is out of bounds is
In
um
relationship to the sun.
yeah, it's the path of the earth around the sun, the
The
ecliptic,
ecliptic.
right?
Yeah.
And so the sun never leaves 20 past 23 and a half degrees either way. And so that's the boundary. And so when basically, if you say it literally, a planet out of bounds is not ruled by or isn't hampered by the rules of the sun, is not
Right.
hampered by the rules of the regular movement of the
Right.
planets, right? So it tends to, anytime you have a planet out of bounds, it tends to not follow the rules. It
Right.
tends to maybe not even necessarily know there are rules, depending
Right.
on what the planet is. It will go above and beyond the limits of that planet for good or ill, doesn't matter.
Right.
It can go either way. And so Mars out of bounds can be definitely a rebel. I'm going to
Yeah.
say that would be the first word I would put on that.
Right.
Would you? Yeah, rebel.
Oh, 100%. So,
Sure.
we're talking about this conditions under which I would go to an astrologer and ask about this are if there are intractable problems with kids, if I can't get my motivation, if I know what I want, but I can't manifest it, or if there are a ton of disagreements around me that are taking away energy. Because these are so subtle in terms of the conditions we're describing that all have different remedies. It's important for you to know when you would be involved in it. We would come to you and talk to you about your Mars, and that would be it. But we're telling you about a whole bunch of different types of
Right.
effects.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing I love so much about remediation is that just being able to tap into that planet in a seemingly obscure way
Mhm.
can start to help you see those patterns around that planet,
Right.
clearer. And you'll start to see, in my experience, I've seen examples of, oh, that's where that went off the rails, or that's when that was really helpful, or, you start to sort of connect to the planet in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah,
So
it's like
yeah, sorry. So
I
we
was
got
gonna
out of bounds. We have peregrine,
yes.
and
So
you were
the
gonna.
next is in Hayes, and in Hayes, Al Baruni shared it's part of this sect, and that's why I was so heavily dropping hints about gender, because it is precisely when the at night a nocturnal planet is in the sky, and it helps if it's in the same gender sign. So the first condition is it diurnal or nocturnal, the chart? The second is the nocturnal planet in the night sky? Is the diurnal planet in the day sky? Okay, so those are the conditions, and there are six, six of each, masculine and feminine. And the effect is it allows the expression of clarity and effectiveness in harmony with temporal, spatial, and qualitative preferences, enhancing capacity for positive outcomes. So that's Rob Hand. So let me break that down. When when it's time to move, you'll have a sense if it's in Mars. When it's correct to move, when you have the space to move, when the people are ready, you will find that less and less effort has to go into the work of that planet
Oh,
because it
okay.
becomes attuned and aligned to its own process.
So
And
it's just more effective.
there are expressions that we may have access to that create that kind of ease and flow for each other, with each other, that are manifested that could come from conditions like these. So when it's in haze, it could still be impacted by a really difficult transit or a really difficult aspect in your natal chart. And when that's the case, there's going to be almost like that Mars in Capricorn where it's exalted, but it's the single exalted Mars that has to work or it stops functioning as an exalted planet. It's like,
Right.
if you want the haze to work and you have difficult aspects, you are going to be working on that,
Right.
for
Right.
the rest of your life. So it's really cool. It implies a lot of cool stuff, but you have to work it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, and the last one is retrograde, which
That's
is
right.
not the least important at all. I mean,
No.
Mars retrograde, and anytime a natal planet is retrograde, um, we turn it inwards. And I mean, for Mars, the simplest thing that you'll see is delayed. The reaction is delayed, which I
Right.
mean to me isn't a bad thing when we're
Right.
talking about Mars
Yeah.
because there's going to be you're going to think before you jump. The danger of it is that frustration and anger gets turned in on the self.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the risk that and something that likely somebody with Mars retrograde is going to be working on, especially in the earlier part of their life, right? Not taking it out on themselves.
Right.
Um, absolutely. And so some remediation there would be super helpful for somebody who's struggling with that. But what were some of the other ideas? Oh, delayed, reconsidered. So maybe the initial action that's chosen, there needs to be some adjustment. Like I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to have to change
Down the
direction.
line. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense too. Um, it can also be because anytime Mars is struggling, it can be reactive.
Mm-hmm.
So even retrograde, but likely maybe the reactivity is again towards the self and the one closest.
Right. Or hidden away, kind of
Yeah.
to protect themselves from
Right.
community
Right.
judgment. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beyond necessary, and it's something to note that the engines that run us, that create behaviors and that move our bodies around, also create disruption and arguments.
Right.
And then it's as we mature and figure out how to tend to that, we can develop more skills or we can stay stuck and just get bigger arguments.
The sun and Mars in a chart
Yes.
are going to represent our vitality.
Yes.
And what made me think about that was if we're talking about Mars by transit, it will energize whatever it comes up against for good or ill, right? Because
Right.
it can really agitate. That can be
Right.
the stimulation you get as you
Right.
get real freaking agitated. It's
Exactly.
very stimulating. That's the word that I want. Mars, when it aspects a planet, is going to be stimulating. Now, if it's by trine, it's likely to produce good things. It could
Right.
exhaust you and you might not notice you're getting burnt out. That's the downside of that. But by difficult aspect, it could be conflict that ends up stimulating a situation in the way that it needs to go, right?
Yes.
By conjunction, it can just become that if you don't act on it by conjunction, that's where some kind of inflammation can come up. That's why sometimes accidents, those
makes
types of
sense.
things, right?
Yeah.
Because it's some kind of action that needs to move things forward, right? Because that's what Mars really wants. It wants us to move forward.
Right.
Wants us to move.
Yes.
It never wants us to be stationary.
Yeah.
Speed and direction is going to be affected by all those other things, but Mars at its core wants us to move.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, we have a 2-year-old cat and he walks around like condensed presence. He's so alive and it looks crazy, like he's way more alive than we are. And that's what I think about with Mars, right? He's totally in touch with his Mars.
Yes.
Totally has it.
Well, and I love that, like that Mars, to me, there's a very alive feeling about
Yes.
Mars. So to think about it in connection to vitality, it makes perfect sense,
Yeah.
because there's just so much motion and liveliness. And um, if you've got Mars and Mercury, whether it's by transit or natally, clearing your mind is going to be achieved through movement,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, and so that it can be super helpful for somebody if they're having Mars, Mercury things to just get out and move. Mars, Moon, you're stuck in your feelings, move,
Yeah.
right? Move,
Yeah.
get your, it doesn't even have to be, you know, abilities aside. You just need to get
Right.
your adrenaline pumping in some way,
A playlist. I know
whatever
we
that
see
looks
it
like.
all the time, but a playlist, a film, I would probably watch the Brad Pitt, Ed Norton one, Fight Club or
Fight
something,
Club. Yeah, that's a
and then
super
turn it
Mars
off as
movie.
soon as I'm done being mad.
That is a Mars retrograde movie right there.
Oh my God.
A
Right?
1000%.
Right? He created this
Absolutely.
entire massive internal world that just took
Aspecting
over.
Neptune
Yeah.
because it was false.
Yeah.
It was imagined. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, if we had to encapsulate Mars and Neptune and Mars being retrograde, that is the movie right there,
I
100%.
agree. I
Agreed.
agree. Yeah.
Yes. One of the things that I recommend to people, so it's interesting when we talk about remediating the malefic planets, because it's like, so are you trying to, like, you want to wake Mars up, but you don't want to wake Mars up too much, right? I mean, it's true of all the planets, but
I saw for in Hayes, they said if Mars is in a female sign, that's okay because it'll just impede the negativity.
okay. All right. That's interesting. I do really want you to speak to the skipped step part of
Absolutely,
Mars.
absolutely. So Mars skip step is an evolutionary astrology process, and so it's occurs. The conditions are Mars is in a square with the nodal axis, and so the suggestion is you have either mastered the Mars process and have only one or two things to learn. You did not learn what you needed to learn with regard to the body or the assertion process. And so you're here to learn. So some of the conditions that created tension for you are kind of drug along. Um, or you are clueless and you're going to need to ask people for help. But the remedy is to turn to the right. And so, say Mars is in Aries. So if I turn to the right, it's going to be in Capricorn. No? For right
Sure.
now? Yeah, let's say Capricorn. So as and if that's the north node or south node in our pretend example, let's say it's the north node, it says addressing maturation, the conditions or the circumstances of Capricorn will assist as I develop my abilities to activate my life's principles. I hope folks are getting it that we're saying we get to see the planet. You all show up with the same planets that everybody else has, but we're looking for the conditions and what happens. And it is rabbit hole after rabbit hole. And I know for me, for the first couple of years of consulting, I had to limit the amount, like a presentation, I had to drop it down to the least amount of time because before I did that, people would leave after 2 hours, sort of, I never want to talk to you again.
Mars is a planet to, I think they all get distilled down to such simple ideas, and we
Well said.
lose the complexity, we lose the beauty. And I think, like, what was really shifting for me was learning the principle of daemon in the chart, and that the planet that is guiding you spiritually. And basically it's just what's most active. It's calculated by, where is it, what assets is making, what's it in charge of. And so really the busiest planet in your chart essentially is your daemon, and mine is Mars. I mean, almost all the things that we listed in this group other than Hayes I have. So my Mars is very busy, and then on top of it it's very busy. And so learning that there is a spiritual side to it, that there's an elevated, a different idea
Right.
around Mars was big for me in understanding my chart. And this was like only a couple of years ago. I'd been studying astrology forever. But being able to see it to a bigger version than just our sex drive and how we go after what we want.
Right, right. Or what we want, kind of that yummy, I'm not gonna lie, that second chakra where you're like, I just want it. I want it and I want it.
And to that point, I'm glad you brought that up because so the Mars chakra is the solar plexus.
Yeah,
And when you think about when you're sitting with what should I do,
yeah.
where do you go? You go to
Right.
your gut,
Yeah,
right? Because it's the one that's going to tell you the
yeah,
action to take.
yeah.
So it's we don't make it up. This is just the way
No.
we're built.
And it's so much more effortless when you're in line, when you're aligned with it. So there's no bad Mars. Each has its own remedy. There's quite a few varieties. And often people will come to astrologers because they're struggling with their Mars.
It's true. Take care, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.